Before we get started, there's two things I'd like to mention. The first is that all the slides, speakers, notes, and the demos are available for download, and I'll be providing a link at the end of the talk. I tend to be one of those folks who can't keep up with the speaker and take notes at the same time. So for those folks in that same situation, there's no need to take notes. Absolutely everything is going to be covered, is going to be available for download at the end of the talk. So I'm also going to be using the following acronyms frequently during this talk: DDM and MDM. Here's what they stand for. If you don't understand what they mean now, hopefully you will by the end of the talk. So let's start by getting on the same page. What is MDM? Well, in the context of Apple devices, mobile device management, or MDM, is a delivery mechanism for distributing data and settings to Apple devices. This includes Macs, iPhones, iPads, Apple TVs, Apple Watches, and Vision Pros. More specifically, MDM is an API for setting device management commands. Now, not all these commands are going to be backwards compatible, so MDM commands for a specific OS version and later won't work on earlier OS versions. So when did this enter the picture? Well, Apple first rolled it out starting with iOS 4, and it came to Apple's other platforms in the OS version shown on the screen. So you can use MDM to push email, security settings, applications, app settings, certificates, and even media content to Apple devices. And there are two major components to MDM. So there's Apple's push notification service, and then there's the MDM server used to manage your devices. So let's take a look at APNS first. When you take your new Apple device out of its box and you power it on for the first time, it doesn't yet know how to connect to APNS. This is because it may have been sitting in a box for a while, and Apple wants to make sure that it's getting the latest information. What it does know is the address of the initialization server it's supposed to talk to, and that it's supposed to download what's called a bag file. The bag file is a plist that contains the necessary data for the Apple device to start talking to APNS. Now that the Apple device knows how and where to start talking to APNS, it will open a connection and it'll say, hello. APNS says hello back, and it'll provide a certificate. The device will check the certificate and verify that it's valid, telling the device that APNS can be trusted to communicate with. The device has an Apple-issued device certificate, so once the device is verified that the certificate provided by APNS is valid, it'll send that device certificate up to APNS. APNS will check the certificate that's been sent by the device, and it'll verify that it's valid. And that'll tell APNS that the device can be trusted to communicate with. And once both sides know that the opposite end can be trusted to communicate with, they'll exchange cryptographic ciphers and they'll start a secure conversation. Now, APNS is going to be used by Apple devices regardless of whether or not they're enrolled in a mobile device management service or not. So for the various apps on your Apple device that use push notifications, APNS is how those notifications are getting sent to your device. APNS also requires having certain ports open outbound. I repeat, outbound. APNS is not going to require any inbound ports. And details on that are available via the link on the screen. And this is probably the part of the KBase article where your InfoSec and firewall folks may start shaking their heads and saying things like, no, no, and can't do it. Now, for those folks having that argument with their security or network folks, here are some important facts to know. You're never going to need an inbound connection for APNS. Only outbound is going to be happening. It uses TLS v 1.2. It's authenticating all the transactions. Now, in the event that your network and security folks absolutely will not do it, Apple does provide a more restricted set of IPv4 and IPv6 address blocks to use. Now, once the argument is over and they have agreed to open up the needed ports, you may find they didn't actually open up all the needed ports. Now, to check this, Apple makes a great diagnostic tool called the Mac Evaluation Utility that can verify that your devices can connect to Apple services. For those folks enrolled in Apple Seed for IT, it is available via that program. Now, for more information on APNS and how it works, I would encourage you to check out Brad Chapman's talk on the subject. It was given at the Jamf Nation User Conference in 2017. It's available via the link on the screen. Now let's turn our attention to the other half of mobile device management, which is the MDM server. So what's this? Well, when you get down to it, it's an HTTP server that responds to communication with either a plist containing a command or HTTP 200, which is the OK response. Most traffic between a device and the MDM server it's enrolled with are going to be p-lists being sent back and forth. Depending on the contents of the p-list, some of what's being passed will be digitally signed or encrypted. For example, this is what a request from the MDM server for a device inventory is going to look like. This is what a command from the MDM to install a certain management profile is going to look like. And an MDM server also needs certificates, just like APNS does. There are two types of certificates specifically used by MDM servers. There's the APNS vendor certificate and the APNS push certificate. So first is the APNS vendor certificate. So this is a special certificate which is used to generate the certificate signing request for an APNS push certificate, prior to uploading that request to Apple for an APNS push certificate. Now, for folks familiar with Jamf Pro, you may have seen this as part of setting up or renewing your APNS push certificate. As part of the APNS setup or renewal, you can select the option of downloading a signed certificate signing request from Jamf Nation. Now, once you've provided the necessary credentials, a signed certificate request for APNS is then downloaded to your Mac. Now, what's happening in the background is that your Jamf Pro server is communicating with a backend system at Jamf with access to the APNS vendor certificate to generate that certificate request for your Jamf Pro server. All MDM vendors are going to have a process like this. I'm just using Jamf here as an example. So what's generated is an encrypted plist ready for uploading to Apple's push certificates portal. So that brings us to the APNS push certificate. So this is a special certificate used by MDM servers to communicate with APNS. So if you've ever set up or renewed an APNS push certificate, you've used the site referenced on the screen. It's where you take the certificate request generated by your MDM and you use it to get a push notification certificate. So your ability to generate a push notification certificate is tied to an Apple ID or an Apple account, which you use to log into the portal site. Now, when it comes to the Apple account used for your APNS certificates, I have some short do's and don'ts to keep in mind. Where possible, you should try to have one Apple account per APNS certificate, and please make sure you have that documented. You should also make sure that you're not using a personal Apple ID or one tied to your work email address. If you can, have a dedicated email mailbox set up for just the Apple accounts involved. Also, really, really important, do not lose the password for that Apple account in question. That said, if you do lose the password to the Apple account in question, Apple does have a process to transfer APNS certificates to another Apple account. I have a blog post on how to do this available via the link of the screen. Now, to show what can happen if you don't follow these rules, here's what the portal looks like when I log in with my personal Apple account. I've got 2 active APNS certificates, and now I have to figure out which specific APNS certificate goes with my MDM server. This is important for reasons I'll discuss more in a bit. So I think I've got the right one figured out, so let's upload that CSR. Great, I've got a new APNS push certificate. Let's download it and get it over to my MDM server. This looks bad. What happened? Well, Apple's push notification service is a chain of trust with multiple security factors being built into that chain. The first part is the certificate that I received from the push certificate portal. When inspected, the certificate looks like this. The second part is what's known as the topic, which is a specific UUID identifier associated with your MDM server. The certificate generated by the push notification portal will include the topic in both the common name and the user ID fields of the certificate. This information is also visible if you click the info button next to the relevant certificate on the portal page. Now, this topic is also embedded in the MDM profile that your MDM server issues to your Apple device, with the topic field listing the user ID field of the APNS push certificate. Now, to circle back to my earlier problem with the push notification certificate, I had accidentally created a new push certificate for my MDM instead of renewing the existing one. Now, because this topic is a UUID, it's going to be unique per MDM push notification certificate, and it can only be included in push notification certificates if you're renewing it. Oops. Well, fortunately, my MDM had warned me before I actually uploaded this new certificate with a different topic. If I'd gone ahead and uploaded it, I would have broken the middle of my trusted chain of certificates. All devices, every single one enrolled with my MDM would have instantly, right away, lost the ability to communicate with the server because APNS would no longer be able to point them to the right MDM server. This is bad. Don't do this. So once I went back, created a new CSR, and made sure to renew the correct APNS certificate this time, everything's fine. So with that knowledge, let's take a look at how the MDM server talks to APNS. So like an Apple device, it's going to open a connection and say hello. APNS will say hello back and provide a certificate. The MDM server will check the certificate and verify that it's valid, telling the server that APNS can be trusted to communicate with. The MDM server now sends the APNS push certificate that it was issued by the Apple push certificate portal. APNS will check the push notification certificate it's been sent and it'll verify that it's valid. That'll tell APNS that the MDM can be trusted to communicate with. Now, once both sides know that the opposite end can be trusted, they exchange cryptographic ciphers and begin a secure conversation. This is just like with an Apple device. Your MDM server to APNS is just another Apple device. Just send a special certificate. However, the push certificate and the topic are not the end of the chain of certificates. The last link for devices is what's known as the device token. This token is generated by APNS and it's unique to the device. So these tokens are the same kind of tokens that APNS is going to assign to applications which use push notifications. Now in this case, the application in question is your MDM server. But how does the device get the token from APNS and know to forward it to your MDM server? Well, this happens as part of MDM enrollment. The device will connect to the MDM server and send in an enrollment request. As part of the enrollment process, the MDM configuration profile is downloaded to the device. The device is now managed by the MDM server. It's able to communicate securely. Now that the MDM profile is in place on the device will register with itself with APNS using the topic. APNS will then generate a token based on the combination of the device ID and the MDM topic. And once APNS has generated that token, it'll get sent down to the device. Sorry, that skipped ahead a little bit. No, it didn't. Along with the token generated by APNS, the device itself will also generate a unique string known as push magic. So this is sent to the MDM server and is associated with the MDM's record for that device. This push magic value is also a UUID, and it ensures that the MDM server is talking to the right device when it sends commands. So now everything involved has the right cryptographic trust relationships in place to communicate securely with each other. So let's use that to send commands to our managed devices. So first step is the MDM server creating a notification payload using the token and push magic of the device that it wants to send something to. Next, APNS forwards that notification to the device. The device will verify that the topic, token, and push magic match, and then it'll accept that notification. The device will send feedback via APNS that it successfully received and decoded the notification. And in response to the notification, the device will check in with the MDM and get whatever command or configuration settings that the MDM has for it. Now, one thing that's important to understand is that no management data ever goes over APNS. APNS is only ever used as a trigger mechanism to make the device ask its MDM for commands to run. This genericness is what allows APNS to be used by everybody who needs to send push notifications, because APNS is only ever telling the device to check in with whatever originally set up that notification for the device. So APNS is also pretty secure because of its verification scheme. By the time an APNS notification reaches its target device, it relies on the push notification certificate being valid. It relies on the topic being valid, relies on the token being valid, and the push magic string being valid. Any of these are not valid, the notification is automatically discarded by that system. Remember how I was talking about APNS had a number of security features built in? This is a big one. So that's MDM, which we've all been using for over a decade to manage Apple devices. What can you do with this? What can you do with mobile device management? Well, as mentioned earlier, you can use MDM to push email, security settings, applications, app settings, certificates, and media content to Apple devices. So let's take a look at a common use case, which is providing security settings to enable the firewall included with macOS. So for example, we've been given the requirement that all Macs in our environment need to have the firewall turned on, with incoming connections allowed only for software included with macOS or apps that have been signed. and the firewall otherwise set to not respond to incoming requests. So you can create an MDM profile to configure these settings and then distribute it. So in this case, I'm using iMazing's profile editor tool, which is available via the link on the screen, to create this profile. So once created, what you have is a plist file with the desired settings. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if a desired setting is the default behavior for macOS, the profile won't necessarily include that setting. For example, if the requirement for the firewall includes blocking all incoming connections, including incoming connections for software included with macOS or apps that have been signed, you may see additional settings added to the profile when it's created. So in the case with iMazing Profile Editor, I'm unchecking the option to allow these incoming connections. Now once created, you'll have a plist file similar to what was shown previously, but it now includes the settings to block incoming connections for software that's included with macOS or apps which have been signed. So these new settings weren't previously included with the profile because the default behavior on macOS is to allow these connections, and thus the profile didn't need to manage it. It was just what the OS was going to do anyway. So once your profile is created, you would upload it to your MDM server. So in this case, I'm going to be using Jamf Pro for my MDM service. Now, different MDM services are going to handle this differently, but in Jamf Pro, you can look at and potentially edit the settings for your firewall profile before uploading it. And once uploaded, you can deploy it to a Mac, which is managed by this MDM server. Now, before the profile is deployed to a Mac, firewall is off, and all incoming connections are allowed. The MDM now deploys the profile, and the settings in the profile get applied to the managed Mac. Now that the profile has been installed, the firewall is on, and new information about what is allowed and what is blocked is displayed. If we click on the Options button, we'll get access to those additional settings. And looking at the additional settings, we can see that the firewall has been configured according to the requirements that we were given. Firewall is turned on with incoming connections only allowed for software included with macOS or apps that have been signed. And the firewall is otherwise set to not respond to incoming requests. Meanwhile, because this is being managed by a profile, the user of the managed Mac doesn't have the ability to change these settings. All toggles, menu items, and other control interfaces are grayed out and inaccessible. So another common use case for MDM is using Apple's Volume Purchase Program, or VPP, to provide applications that are being installed by an MDM command. So in this case, your MDM is providing a way to install apps using MDM commands. And for more information on VPP, please see the link at the bottom of the screen. So let's take a look at how this works using Apple's Configurator app, which is available via the Mac App Store or via VPP. So in this case, again, I'm using Jamf Pro for my MDM service, and I'm setting up Configurator to use Jamf Pro's self-service to provide on-demand installation of Configurator. So let's see how this looks. Got self-service open, installing Configurator. Okay, done. And now I'm just going to hit the open button. And that was it. Configurator is now installed. So on the MDM side, we can see that there was an MDM command sent to install Configurator. And what this means is that an MDM command was sent to the Mac and it contained a URL. And that URL said, here's where you grab Configurator from. And on the Mac side, we can see the Configurator is installed. And now that we've discussed MDM and some use cases, what's this declarative device management? What's DDM? Well, here's what it is. It's a new data management paradigm that uses a declarative data model, which is designed to address and avoid performance and scaling issues commonly seen with MDM. Here's what it's not. It's not a new protocol. DDM has been added to the MDM management protocol to make switching to DDM easier. Think of DDM as being wrapped up inside. So you can continue to use MDM, DDM commands get sent inside that tunnel. So when can you use DDM? Well, Apple first rolled it out starting with iOS 15, and it came to Apple's other platforms in the OS version shown on the screen. Why do we want to use this? We have MDM, right? Well, to make a long story very short, MDM without DDM is a very server-focused management protocol. The endpoints are told to check in with their MDM server. The endpoints do, and the server tells them to do something. Over and over, endpoint checks in, server tells the endpoint what to do, endpoint does it. The server in this scenario is doing pretty much all the work of figuring out what to do. The endpoint's role is figuring out what the server tells it to do. Now, Apple wants to make sure that the MDM protocol remains responsive and scales to meet a growing population of devices. So changes are needed. And for anyone who's managing, say, more than 50,000 Apple devices, you've seen what I'm talking about. DDM is designed to take some of the load off the server by moving some of the management to the endpoints. With DDM, the endpoint is being given more responsibility for managing itself and deciding when to report back to the management server. So this change does three things right away. One, it reduces the network resources needed for MDM communication. Two, it reduces load on your management server. And three, it just saves time overall. Like MDM, DDM uses a structured data model. So let's take a look at what this looks like, starting with declarations. Declarations are the policies sent to a device. They have a structure that looks like this. And surprise, now this is JSON in place of XML. Type identifies the policy that the declaration is using. Identifier provides a unique identifier for the declaration in the form of a UUID. Server token provides a unique identifier for the current version of the declaration based on the identifier value in the declaration. And this is also going to be in the form of a UUID. Payload contains the settings for the policy being sent by that declaration. So as a quick review, here's all that makes up the structure of a DDM declaration. And declaration is like a command. Think of this DDM declaration, MDM command. So let's dig into the various declaration types. The first is the configuration type, and this should be pretty familiar. This is a policy definition similar to what's used in MDM profiles. Next, there are assets, and these are data that is needed by a configuration, like MDM URLs, certificates, email addresses, or contact information. So here's how an asset looks like as a declaration. As you can see, this is sending down someone's email information. Now, the great thing about assets in DDM is that they can have a one-to-many relationship. One asset can be used for many different configurations. So this is a great advantage for DDM configurations over MDM profiles, as MDM currently requires that the resources for that profile need to be available in that profile. It needs to all be in the same thing. So for example, if you need to have the same certificates for authentication for both your Wi-Fi network and your VPN server, that means you have to, either you need to have your Wi-Fi and VPN configuration as in the same profile as those certificates, or you're going to be duplicating those certificates in the profiles used to configure Wi-Fi and VPN on your devices. In addition, anytime you would need to update a certificate in this scenario, it's necessary to remove and reinstall the profile. Now, for folks who have done this with Wi-Fi profiles, you've definitely seen what happens. Profile gets yanked, oh, I can't complete it because now I can't talk to the network anymore. My MDM server is inaccessible. So, removal of a profile may be the only step that the device would accomplish in this scenario because you can't phone home anymore. But with this one-to-many relationship, you can change one asset and it'll update in all the configurations that use it. So this is a huge step forward in functionality because now we can make incremental updates to a configuration without having to re-push it. So going back to the Wi-Fi profile issue I just mentioned, that should mean that Wi-Fi stays up and working the whole time during the profile update process. Should. Now, activations are a group of configurations that get applied to a device. They also specify the logic that determines how and when the policies defined by the configurations get applied to that managed device. Now, these configurations are also applied atomically to the device, such that the system applies all reference configurations together, or it applies none of them. So all the configurations and the assets used by those configurations, they have to be valid in order for the system to apply the activation. If you have an invalid configuration or an invalid asset used by one of those configurations, nothing happens. Nothing gets applied. And this is kind of good and bad. You don't want bad stuff going out, but all of a sudden, if you have a very complex configuration and you hit the button and nothing happens, now you got to go digging through and figure out where did I go wrong. So activations in DDM can have a many-to-many relationship where configurations can be referenced by multiple activations. So one activation can hit multiple configurations at once, and a configuration can be used by multiple activations. This means that you can have your devices process complex business logic, while DDM means that the devices handling this logic are doing this autonomously in place of your server having to do all that work. Now, along with activations, we also get what's called predicates. So these will determine the activation state, if active or not, on a device. So this is going to use Boolean logic, true or false. And an activation will only be processed by a device if the predicate evaluates to be true. So here's an example of our previous activation declaration where the predicate is set to only evaluate to true on an iPad. So you could send this out, goes out to everybody, your Macs will ignore it, your iPhones will ignore it, it'll only apply to your iPads. The final kind of declaration is a management declaration. Management declarations are used to send overall management state to the device. So this includes a declaration describing details about the organization, as well as a declaration describing the capabilities of the MDM server. Now, these declarations are helpful for conveying static data to the device, which shouldn't change. So those are our 4 types of declarations, but there's more to dig into, so let's take a look at what DDM calls the status channel. So in the DDM communication model, there's communication between the management server and the devices going on, but there is less communication going on because of the status channel. Status channel is a way for the server to subscribe only to that information that your server needs from that device. So once the server has subscribed to specific status items, and it does this automatically, you don't need to configure anything for this, it'll handle it on its own. The client will report to the server only on those status items. Now, this model of endpoint to server communication cuts way back on the unneeded chatter that happens with MDM. And it'll provide the server with only the information that it actually needs. Now, status items are identified by KeyPass, which consists of period-separated string tokens, and examples of those are shown on the screen. So here's how a status channel subscription may look. And a response from the endpoint may look like this. Now, Apple's products have a long life cycle, so it's essential to maintain compatibility between different versions of an MDM solution with Apple devices of varying ages and capabilities. So declarative management means that both the device and the MDM server are now advertising their supported capabilities to each other. So either side of the management system is now aware of what the other side supports because each side is now advertising what it can do to each other. So each side knows when it can start taking advantage of new features. So these advertisements include a list of supported features representing both major and minor protocol updates. So the endpoint will advertise its supported payloads, including the full set of declarations and status items supported by that device. So say you're going from Sonoma to Sequoia, Sonoma supported, hey, I can do this stuff. You upgrade to Sequoia, Sequoia has new stuff, and it tells the MDM server, I can do this stuff too now. Meanwhile, the MDM server advertises its capabilities to the endpoint via management declaration. You upgrade your MDM, it's got new capabilities, it can advertise back to the endpoint, hey, I got new stuff for you now. So when the MDM server is upgraded, it'll synchronize all new capabilities with the device like it would any other declaration, and that's going to allow the device to start working with the MDM server's new features. So likewise, same thing for the endpoint, like I was just saying. It'll send its new capabilities up to the MDM server as a specific status item when the device's capabilities change. So DDM is integrated into the MDM protocol, and it'll use it for managing the enrollment and unenrollment process, for handling the HTTP transport communication, and for device and user authentication. So basically, in terms of enrollment, you're using DDM now, but you're going to be enrolling just like you always have. DDM should not interfere with existing MDM behavior, except where Apple says it does. And I'll be talking more about that in a little bit. So declarations, in fact, will leverage existing MDM behaviors using an MDM command for activation and an MDM check-in request for synchronization and status reports. So this is intended to ease the migration process from MDM to DDM. In fact, you can send an existing MDM profile as a configuration. So this allows profiles, like you've always been using them, to be used with DDM, which means you can shift profile-based logic to an endpoint without having to change any of your profiles. Very nifty. And just to show you that it's in fact turtles all the way down, this means that in some cases you could have added a setting as a managed preference to Workgroup Manager in macOS 10.3 Panther Server in 2003. Just a show of hands, how many people were actually working with 10.3 Server in 2003? All right, actually more than I expected. So later you move that managed preference setting into a profile in macOS 10 Lion using profile support for MCX settings. And now, 20 odd years after adding that setting to Workgroup Manager, you can use DDM to deploy that profile with that MCX setting, and it still works. Why do we care about this? What can you do with declarative device management? Well, first, let's look at some of what's available in macOS Sequoia and iOS 18. So software updates are manageable via DDM, and they can enforce deploying a specified OS version and build which must be installed by a specified time. Now, to help ease migration, DDM software update commands can coexist with their counterpart MDM commands for managing software updates. Now, that said, DDM management is going to take precedence in this case over MDM commands. So this is one of those situations where DDM should not interfere with existing MDM behavior, except Apple says it does. So I don't know about you, but this is what I looked like when I found out about DDM software updates. So DDM can also help out with app deployments, with options for apps being sent to devices before a specified time and only made available once that app is needed. So you can send apps down to a device and they just don't show up until, poof, you hit the deadline and all of a sudden now they're there. DDM also enables the option for the app being shown without actually being installed. And that gives the user the choice of when to install it. Now, one benefit of this is that since the user is choosing to install, if this is like an unsupervised iOS device, there's no extra consent dialog which appears because you're choosing to install it, thus you're already consenting. Now, on macOS Sonoma and later, DDM configurations can be used to specify sets of tamper-resistant system configuration files for different system services. Now, in their session at WWDC 2023, Apple mentioned that the built-in services listed on the screen could be managed that way, and it remains the current list as of macOS Sequoia. So for folks having to deal with security, folks that are like, you have to have a specific configuration for something, DDM will allow you to apply it. And DDM also improved file vault status monitoring with a status item that is going to return true or false Boolean values. Now, on macOS Sequoia and later, DDM configurations can also be used to specify sets of tamper-resistant files that run tasks. So in this case, you're deploying whatever tools you want to run along with the launch agent, if you want that task to run as a logged-in user, or a launch daemon, if you want that task to run as root. But what can you do today, right now, with declarative device management? Well, as I mentioned, I was pretty happy to hear about the improvements to managing software updates, so let's take a look at that use case using Jamf Pros or MDM. So in Jamf Pro, you would do this by logging into Jamf Pro and selecting software updates. From there, you would select a Jamf Pro smart or static group to apply your software update settings to. So in this case, I'm selecting a static group named Manage Software Update Deployment Group. From here, I'm selecting the option to download and schedule to install, which is a DDM-specific option. Now, the software update screen is also going to include the options for the MDM software update commands. So the way you can tell the DDM ones from the MDM ones is that the DDM options will call out that they require macOS 14, iOS 17, or later OS versions. So for this example, I'm choosing to set a force install date of May 24th at noon, and that each device should update to the latest version of the OS available based on the kind of device that it is. So once I've made my choices and saved my changes, Jamf Pro should tell me how many devices have received this update request. So in this example, I'm sending these software update settings to exactly one device. And if we look at that device's inventory record in Jamf Pro, we should see that the device received a DDM software update plan, and it's working on it. And that'll provide us with the JSON output for our DDM software update settings. Now, once the update is completed, we should see this where we previously saw information about the OS update plan. Because this is now a past event, Jamf Pro moves this information to the operating system history. And you can get details about that completed software update plan here, and there's also a view event store link here to get the JSON output. Now, on your managed devices, you can verify that the new software update plan has been deployed by clicking on the enrollment profile and then scrolling to the bottom. This is pretty much how you see all applied DDM information at this time. You should see a device declaration section with a listing for software update. And if you click on the software update listing, you'll see details about the plan that I want you to, for this device, the latest thing you can get to is 15.5, and that I want it updated by noon on the 24th. So let's see how this looks from a user's perspective. You'll get this little dialog box with a button option for details and update. And if you click on details, it'll open up system settings and show that you're working on a software update. Hang on. Is that going to do details or is that, no. Okay, sorry, 1 second. There we go. Here's the video I want. So here's what happens if you tell it, I want to do this now. This is going to be very sped up. Normally this would probably take like a half hour to do, but I'm telling you I'm going to restart. It's going to ask me for authentication since I'm logged in. It's going to do the update. As you can tell, sped this up quite a bit. And then you go up, you check, and what am I running now? I have been running 15.4.1. I'm now running 15.5. And that's pretty much what your users should see. In the event that they would not choose to do anything with the notification, just dismiss it, it'll, at some point, if they hit the deadline, it'll be like, you're doing this now, and then it'll do it now. So if you notice, as part of the update process, it asks for the logged in user's credentials to authenticate installing the software update. What if nobody had been logged in? Well, in that case, the MDM would have provided what's known as bootstrap token to provide the needed authentication to run that software update. Now, for more information on bootstrap tokens and how they work in this scenario, please see the link at the bottom of the screen. Now, another use case for DDM is that, as previously discussed, DDM configurations can be used to specify tamper-resistant system configuration files for specified services on macOS. So at WWDC 2023, Apple said these services can be managed this way. Sudo is included in that list. Again, this is getting back into maybe your security folks have particular configurations that they need. So let's take a look at how you can deploy a sudo configuration using Jamf Pro and its blueprints functionality. So by default, macOS 15.5.0 ships with a sudo configuration file that looks like this. And we are going to change the following line to now read as follows. So what'd that do? What this does is it removes the ability of all users of the admin group to use all available privileges for the sudo tool. By default, when you get administrator rights, you also get all rights to sudo just by being in the administrator group. I've now taken that away and assigned it specifically to a user with the account short name of other user. Now, to deploy this change with blueprints, 3 things are needed. You need a zip file which contains both the directory and the file structure of the configuration file in question. Now, the sudo configuration file is stored in the root etc directory, so /etc, and the file is named sudoers. So a zip file containing a directory named etc with a file inside the etc directory named sudoers is going to be needed for this. So for this example, we'll name the zip file as sudoers_configuration.zip. Now, the second thing we're going to need is the SHA-256 hash of that zip file. And you can use the SHA-256 sum command line tool to get the SHA-256 hash of that zip file. So a command similar to the one shown on the screen should provide that information as an alphanumeric string. And the last thing we're going to need is a place to download the zip file, which allows downloading without authentication. So for this example, I've set up an S3 bucket in Amazon Web Services, and I've set the zip file to be downloadable by anybody from that S3 bucket. Now, once I have all those items available, I can set up a blueprint in Jampro to deploy that sudo configuration file as a services configuration file. Now to do this, you need to log into Jampro and select blueprints. And from there, I would select the open button for service configuration. When prompted, you would provide a name for that configuration. In this case, I'm just calling it sudo configuration. Next, you'll need to select a Jampro smart or static group that you want to deploy that configuration to. So in this case, I'm selecting a static group with the name sudo configuration deployment group. And last, you'll need to provide the necessary information to download the sudoers configuration zip file. So for this, you're going to need to provide an HTTPS URL for downloading the file. It must be HTTPS. HTTP will not work. The SHA-256 hash, this is how the device is able to verify that what it's getting is what it's expecting. And you would set the service definition to sudo. And once everything has been configured, Jampro should notify you that you have undeployed changes. So you would click the deploy button to deploy the changes to the Macs you want to manage. This is how it works for Jampro. Other MDMs that can deploy sudo configurations may look a little different, but in general, they're all going to work the same way. Once deployed, the blueprint screen in Jampro should show the newly created sudo configuration blueprint as being deployed. Now on your managed devices, you should be able to verify that the new sudo configuration has been deployed by clicking on the enrollment profile and then scrolling to the bottom. You should see a device declarations section with a listing for configuration files, com apple sudo. And if you click on the listing, it should provide the path to the tamper-resistant directory where it's stored that new sudo configuration file. So inside the directory you see on the screen will be the Etsy directory containing the sudoers file that you configured from that blueprint zip file. So this path is actually not complete. Basically what you would tack on after com apple sudo is /etsy/sudoers to get the complete path to the file. Now you will not be able to write to this location as it is protected by system integrity protection. That means that no one's going to be able to mess with it. But you should be able to read from that file and verify that the contents are what you're expecting. So you can do a double check to make sure that what got delivered is what you're expecting. And you should also be able to verify that now that you have this sudo configuration deployed, only the other user account can use the sudo tool. Now, one more use case is that, as previously discussed, DDM can be used to deploy MDM configuration profiles. So let's take a look at how you can deploy a configuration profile with device restrictions using Jampro and its blueprints functionality. So I can set up a blueprint in Jampro to deploy a configuration profile with device restrictions. So to do this, I would need to log into Jampro and select blueprints. From there, I would click the Create Blueprint button. There isn't a template option available yet. This is something I've raised internally. So for right now, you pretty much have to do this manually. But it's a couple extra steps, it's not too bad. When prompted, provide a name for the configuration. For this example, I'm using restriction settings for macOS. Now at this point, we should see an unconfigured blueprint. From here, we scroll down in the list on the right-hand side of the browser to locate the restrictions component. And from here, we click and drag the restrictions component to the declarations group section. Mouse over the restrictions component, you'll see a configurations button appear. And you would click on that configure button to edit the restrictions component. Now, at this point, you'll see all available restriction settings which are available for all Apple platforms. One of the things that Blueprints is doing that's kind of cool in the background, Apple has a GitHub repo that lists all, basically all the configurations it currently has available for device restrictions. Blueprints is talking to that. So as Apple adds new stuff shows up in Blueprints. It's a nice capability. Now, that's a long list. So fortunately, we can filter using the filter button, which is indicated in red. So let's use the example of blocking these Apple Intelligence functions on Managed Macs. So first, we can filter for just those settings which apply to both macOS and Apple Intelligence using our filtering settings. Then we can find and select the following options, set them to false, and save our changes. And now we have a blueprint that has all the settings configured, but where no target scope has been yet defined, so we don't know what devices we're sending them to. So to scope this blueprint, you would go to the Scope section and click the Open button. And for this example, you can select either smart or static groups. In this case, I'm selecting a static group called Restrictions Deployment Group. I'm just using a static group in this example, but like I said, this also works with smart groups as well. Once the desired groups have been set and verified for the scope, you'd hit the Save button. And once everything has been configured, JamPro should inform you you have an undeployed blueprint. Click the Deploy button, and that'll deploy the changes to the Macs you want to manage. Once you do that, Blueprint screen in JamPro should show the newly created restriction settings for macOS Blueprint as being deployed. Now on your managed devices, you can go check out and make sure that deployment has worked by clicking on the enrollment profile, then scrolling to the bottom. So if you're deploying a legacy profile via Blueprint, you should see a profile section appearing in device declarations. So in the profiles section, there's a listing with the name that matches the name of the blueprint that was deployed. So in the case of our example, the listing shows restriction settings for macOS. And if you click on the restriction settings for macOS listing, you should see the details of what is being managed. And if you notice, it's just the settings that we define. There's nothing else in there. So for folks who are deploying restrictions via Jamf Pro, I would recommend that you start using DDM for this as opposed to the other way, because the DDM method allows you to set just the restrictions you want and nothing else. One thing that DDM is not, as of yet, is configuration management akin to that provided by Puppet, Ansible, Salt, or other solutions. How many folks are familiar with these solutions for configuration management? Okay, good, all right. So with those solutions, the configuration management server provides a plan to the managed endpoint, and the endpoint makes sure that that configuration is applied no matter what. So this includes automatically reverting changes to managed settings made by the end user on the endpoint. Now, as of now, DDM's ability to report changes via status channel means that automatic reporting of changes isn't there, but automatic remediation, which would be handled by the endpoint, is not. I really hope this is coming to DDM, but we're not there yet. Now, I've hit you with a lot of information, but do you really need to know all this stuff about MDM and DDM? Largely no. This is stuff your MDM vendor needs to know and needs to figure out. However, understanding what's going on with both MDM and DDM means that we know what to ask for from our vendors in terms of new features as Apple makes them available. And understanding how all this works in the background can help you with figuring out why isn't this working the way I want it to. So looking ahead, I specifically see DDM as providing us as Mac admins with a deeper and wider toolkit for management than we've had before, which frankly is a really great thing. And with that, because you can never have too much information about new topics and new things, here's some useful links. Got some more useful links. Got some more useful links. And hopefully the most useful links you see in this presentation, because this is how you get it all. PDF with the slides and speakers notes are available from the top link. Keynote slides with the slides, the speakers notes, the demos, the absolutely everything I've been talking about is available via the link on the bottom. And with that, I'm going to leave that up on the screen and open the floor for questions. One moment. I also had a bag of candy to pass around, but it looks like the gentleman who I entrusted it to has wandered away. So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just actually, just to start passing it around, just hand it to the next person. If anyone wants candy, it's a variety of chocolates. There's some Twix in there. Take some, pass it around. If you don't want to, no peer pressure. You don't have to take candy from a stranger. Hopefully, I'm less strange now, but just, no pressure. And with that, I will open the floor for questions to you, sir. Hang on. Let me, oh, not on yet. Hang on.
Hello?
Oh, it is on. All right. My throwing arm is not great, so here we go. An excellent demonstration of my not great throwing arm. All right.
As a Jamf Pro client, in my day-to-day usage in Jamf Pro, I tend to see what I need, not necessarily what's there. And I'm curious, how long has Blueprints been available in Jamf Pro?
So Blueprints is, this is functionality that was added this year. It does require having the new admin SSO login authentication set up for it. Once it's there, like if you're running a current version of Jamf Pro, you should see a listing for blueprints on the side, and if you click on it without admin SSO being set up, it'll just basically say you need to set up admin SSO. Once admin SSO is set up, if you click on blueprints, you should see kind of like the default screen with the templates.
Okay, so since it just came in this year, I'm not as far behind the curve as I thought I might be.
Yeah, this is fairly new. All right, gentlemen at the end.
Incoming.
Ah,
Thank you.
people have better throwing arms than me. That's good. Okay, what can I do for you, sir?
Testing. I've been playing around with managed software updates for a bit now, and we actually opened up the endpoints and the ports to allow it into production for our proxy. But recently, over the last week or so, my endpoints are just not getting the update with the DDM. How do you suggest to troubleshoot the managed software updates?
Oh, managed software. Okay, so probably do they show up in Jamf Pro as having received it, or
Yeah, so the most recent one, I'm trying to log in right now, but network's not playing with me. But it's been stuck at collecting DDM status
Okay.
at the end there, and I can't see where it's breaking because the eval utility shows all the endpoints are good and green. Honestly, I have to do it again just to make sure. But yeah, that's the issue that I've been running into.
That is a good question, because here's what can happen, is that you may have to look at the event logging that's coming back.
Yeah.
Because what can happen is that when the declaration gets sent to the device reports back an error to Jamf Pro. And when that happens, Jamf Pro stops listening for any subsequent updates for that managed software update plan for that device. But what can happen on the device is that it will be like, okay, I've cleared whatever error was causing me problems before, and then it'll retry. But that never gets reported back to Jamf Pro. So on Jamf Pro, you're like, I've got like 50 devices that are failing, but now they're running the latest OS. How did that happen?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would say your best rough guideline for now is seeing if the device actually updated. Is it now
Right.
running the desired OS version? If it
Right.
did, call it a win.
All right. I guess last question is when running the deadline command for the DDM one, what do you suggest? Like 2 hours from, like, say I have a lab Mac right next to me, and I want to see if it works. I set it for like 2 hours, 3 hours away, just to go
Yeah.
through it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to test it out, yeah, set it for an hour, set it for whatever. You know, if you want to set it for like right now, if you're testing it, you know,
Yeah.
of course don't do this to your users, but if you want to
Right,
set
right.
it for like basically right now, as soon as the declaration hits the device, it's going to go, oh, okay, I need to do this now, or I needed to do this like an hour ago. And at which point it'll just be like, boom, let's do it.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, back there.
Is there any benefit to sending the configuration profiles through Blueprint?
I would say that, well, for device restrictions in Jamf Pro, there is a definite advantage because you can now send just the settings that you want. I would say in terms of sending configuration profiles via DDM as opposed to MDM, is that you get to take advantage of DDM's overall fewer resource needs. So it's less impact on your server to send out if you have a large fleet. It's one of those things that as you scale up, your MDM server is having to do more work because it's talking to more devices. So anything you can do to reduce that workload, in my opinion, is a good thing.
So is that to say that when that declaration's there, the system's gonna continually check the declaration profile instead of having to check with the MDM to see if the settings change?
So in that case, MDM, mainly what you're changing with configuration profile behavior is the delivery mechanism, nothing else. And configuration profiles apply their settings at time of installation, and after that, nothing, it never checks them again. It's going to be the same for DDM. So it's not like it's what I was getting back to on how it's not like Ansible or Puppet or Salt. It's not doing that continuous checking. For configuration profiles, it's going to be pretty much the exact same behavior as that you've been used to. It's just now it's getting delivered by DDM instead of MDM. Anybody else got questions? Yep, here we go, up in front. Gentleman in the blue shirt.
Oh, there's coffee there.
There we go. People working together. I love it.
So with the software update, end user gets presented with the put in your password dialog, and what if your end users just ignore it?
Well, in that case, so like I was getting back to with the bootstrap token, as long as that bootstrap token is escrowed with your MDM, in the event that your user is just like, I'm ignoring this, then the bootstrap token provides that necessary authentication. If the bootstrap token is not escrowed up to the device, which that can happen sometimes as part of enrollment, in that case, it would just be like, sorry, I'm stuck without user authentication. But with the bootstrap token in place, it'll just be like, I don't need you, man. I'm doing it anyway.
Is there any way to force the bootstrap token so the end user doesn't have to authenticate? So
I
you
mean,
just hit
the
update
bootstrap
and
token
it goes.
should be escrowed up to your MDM server as part of enrollment. Should. You know, there are some cases where sometimes that, you know, when it gets sent up, something doesn't work. There is a profiles command that will allow you to, so it's like profiles dash install type bootstrap token that will allow you to have that sent up. However, that is going to require user authentication to run, because you'll run it and the next thing it'll do is say, oh, I need a username, and then it's going to ask for a password. This is something actually that as part of macOS Tahoe, if you, I think if you watch the What's New in Device Management video from this year's WWDC, Apple mentions that they have improved those.
Okay.
Anybody else got questions? Sure. Yeah, let's pass along that microphone.
All right, it's I know nobody wrote this up, but in case anybody was wondering, Intune does have some DDM options, because I know you were talking about Jamf Pro specifically,
Yeah.
but it's not, I don't know if anybody else is in here is looking at Intune, but it's limited, I'm actually looking at it right now, to disk management, map settings, passcode, Safari extension settings, software update, and software update enforce latest. But there's no custom options, so you're pretty much limited to what they have made available. So if anybody is looking to Intune or is currently using Intune, that would be something to bring up with Microsoft to be able to expand your DDM options, especially since Jamf has that custom option that you can make your own DDM. And that's also available in, I think, like Nano MDM and like other MDM.
Yeah, different MDM vendors, you know, basically Apple's writing the playbook for this and telling the MDM vendors, you know, this is what we're making available. Please get on board. So different MDM vendors are going to be implementing different features on their own timelines. So, but one thing Apple has been making clear is that DDM is where things are going. New functionality, they're not going to be adding new functionality to MDM. They are going to be adding new functionality to DDM. So it seems clear that I would say like 5 years from now or less, we're hardly going to be talking about MDM anymore. It's all going to be DDM. All right, got questions over here?
Read some more of a comment yesterday in one of the sessions. There were a lot of Apple people
In the session, we discovered that Apple has decided that MDM is no longer a thing, and it's now going to be called DMS.
Device management
Services.
Okay.
Yeah. And my guess is that probably the first M in MDM
Yeah.
implicates that it's only for mobile devices, which clearly it's not. But I was just wondering if the folks at Jamf knew about that and when they might embrace the new future.
Well, you know, this is going to be one of those things that Apple's going to change how it's going to define things. And I mean, my personal, you know, and this is something I've run into with other stuff from Apple before. My personal favorite is File Vault, where everything, for those who dealt with File Vault before File Vault 2 came out in 10.7, File Vault was very different between 10.3 and 10.6, but Apple decided to just refer to everything, you know, both the legacy implementation and what we now just call File Vault, which was File Vault 2. They just called it all File Vault. It was kind of up to you to figure out which File Vault we're talking about. So I think this is Apple redefining as times change. And honestly, the fact that they're tacking on service at the end, I thought they were just going to call it device management. So it makes sense because at this point, we're covering goggles that go on your head. We're covering something that goes on your wrist. You're covering a little box that feeds your TV. We're covering a laptop computer or a desktop computer, and we're covering like a tablet or a phone. It makes sense to get rid of the mobile part. Half the stuff, well, I guess the Apple TV is the only thing that you really couldn't just pick around and walk away with. But it makes sense to just call it device management now.
We were also politely reminded that it's no longer VPP, it's apps and books.
Ah, yes, apps and books, yes. But this is one of those things that terminology changes, and not everybody, is always like up to the second on what Apple has decided to call something. If you notice, a lot of my slides referred to Apple ID in place of Apple account, because that's what people are used to referring to it as. VPP is kind of in the same boat, but you're right, it is apps and books now. If you look up Apple's documentation, they don't call it VPP, it's apps and books. Anybody else got any other questions? All right, well, it looks like we have about 14 minutes left. Last call for questions. If not, how about we get out a little early? Oh, wait, is that a question? Okay, we got a question.
Where's it at?
So, Blueprints, is that not available for on-prem servers?
Blueprints is available for cloud-hosted services. Unfortunately, it is not available for on-prem. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you all. You've been a lovely audience.